Awesome. Firstly, I haven't done a conference talk since March 2020, and so I am really excited about this. Thank you, Agile and Beach organisers. I think putting this together like this is an absolutely fantastic thing, and I'm super excited. Hopefully you are too. So thank you very much for coming along. I'm going to talk to you today about incrementally improving performance and tell you a little bit about some things that we've done in various teams and various companies I've worked in that I think have helped improve the performance of our teams. So, question for you. Much sniggering at the back. So, who's had a performance review in the last year? Maybe stick your hands up. Who's given a performance review? So who's, as a manager, given a performance review? Cool. Who found either of those things, or maybe both of them, a motivating and enlightening and fantastic experience? Brilliant. Because what I've noticed, typical performance reviews, they tend to go on maybe a 6-month or sometimes a 12-monthly cycle. I've had reviews as a member of a team, I've had reviews as a manager, and normally that process is strictly policed by your HR or your people team, and you as a manager in particular, you feel like you have to tick all these boxes and do the feedback, do the review, do the objectives, do the pay rise proposal, and well, what typically happens is this in that situation, in my experience. So you get to the review and you say, hey, let's review your objectives. And you go through them and you're like, oh, that's not relevant anymore. That project never ran. That's not relevant anymore. Oh, you didn't have time to do that. Oh, it doesn't matter. So everyone forgets about their objectives and their goals. In an organization, it's mandated to do all of this at the same time. And so it gets super disruptive. You've got team members who are having to give feedback on other team members, and sometimes your better team members get asked to give feedback on more people. They're trying to prepare for their reviews. As a manager, you're trying to prepare all your reviews. You're trying to do all of this work in one really short time period. It's not done very frequently, and therefore it's something that's not habitual, and therefore it's something that nobody looks forward to. It's something that makes people anxious. And I've experienced this, both my own reviews, but also when I've been giving reviews for my team members. It's not something like, I don't think, woohoo, it's review season, yay. And it all gets a bit demotivating, frankly. And worst case scenario, it turns into a tick box exercise. Let's get through the review period, tick, let's move on, let's get on with our lives, keep building software. And the typical review timeline looks a bit like this. So you've got objectives, and you've got review, and you've got this massive bit in the middle where things happen, life goes on. You've got this really long feedback cycle. And you've got this big temptation in that long feedback cycle, for example, as a manager, not to deal with problems because I can wait till review. And sometimes it can wait till review is months away, and you give some feedback to a member of your team and it means nothing, and they don't respond to it because you didn't do it in a timely way. And this always bugs me because we develop our software incrementally. We have fast feedback loops. We deploy perhaps weekly, daily, many times a day, yet we develop our people on huge, great long feedback loops, and we wonder why it doesn't work. It doesn't make sense to me. And sometimes it can get worse. So I've worked in places where they do things called stack ranking. And yeah, so I can see some nods here. Stack ranking is that horrible thing where as a manager you have to fit your team into roughly this sort of profile. So you can only have a few really, really awesome people. And you can have a whole bunch of kind of pretty good people. And you also have to have some not as good as everybody else people, which isn't really very fair. It's massively demotivating for everybody involved. Some companies use it for horrible things, like worst case scenario, the people who find themselves in the droopy flower bit actually end up without a job. And as an industry, we're moving away from this stuff, and I think that's brilliant. But yeah, I've worked places in the past where we've had to do this. And it just further means you don't look forward to reviews, and you don't get anything out of reviews. I think we can make this all better. And what I want to tell you about today is I want to tell you about how some of these things that I've tried that I believe have helped to incrementally improve performance in our teams. So firstly, very remiss of me, who am I? So my name is Steve. I am the VP Engineering at a company called Bloom and Wild. So we are a flower company. We're in fact now, super exciting, we're the largest online flower company in Europe, which is awesome. We don't have my Twitter ID written in massive letters on the wall of our reception, by the way. However, I know what conferences are like. Your question comes into your head, you can't find the speaker anymore, so if you want to get hold of me and you can't find me at any point over the next couple of days, that's a good way of getting hold of me. We do flowers and plants by post, so through the letterbox and to your doorstep. The engineering team is 40 people. No one's looking at that because I've put a discount code on there. Please use that discount code for 15% off if you get only one thing out of this presentation. No, you didn't come here to get a discount code. We're going through that transition from a kind of latter stage startup to a scale up to something which is really quite big. I mean, we've done a couple of acquisitions this year, for example, and when you add the acquired people in, we're actually about 400 people, which I started, there were 40 people. There's more people in my team now than there were in the whole company when I joined almost 4 years ago. So we're trying to work out how we can adapt our culture, and these are some of the things I'll tell you about are the things that we've baked into our culture that we really think help improve. So I want to tell you a story about that. I also wanted to shoehorn this slide in just because I find it really hypnotic, and if we could just stare at this slide of bouncing peonies for the rest of the presentation, I'd probably be happy. No. What I really believe is everybody comes to work to try and do their best. And what we need to do is we need to build an environment that allows them to do that. So we need to build an environment and a culture that they buy into, set them goals both personally and team-based that they can really engage with, and make sure that we give space to think and to grow. And we don't treat all of this as a tick box exercise. And I think there's some questions that we can answer that will help guide us through that. Because people have questions. And particularly if you're managing people, it's your job to help answer those questions and support people. So there's 5 questions we're going to look through today. So question number 1, what am I appealing to? So that's a question that you, as a manager, may be thinking, what am I actually trying to appeal to with my team member? Your team member and you're most likely thinking, well, how am I growing? Why am I here? What's progress and success and generally personal growth look like to me? Once you've stopped thinking about yourself, I hope you're also thinking about your team, because I don't think you can grow independently. So how's the team growing? Naturally, we all then start to think about how we can align our teams, ourselves, our companies together. And then lastly, particularly if you're looking at making a change, I would strongly suggest having an answer to is this supported by our HR processes, and if not, what am I going to do? It's a question that I had to answer myself as part of rolling out some of the things I'm going to talk about today. So let's talk about what I'm appealing to first. So first step is really about motivating people. And if you can motivate people, that's, I think, the best way we can incrementally improve performance. Understanding people, understanding their motivations, why they come to work in the first place. And motivation, effectively, it just means to be moved to do something. So what is it that motivates us? Is it money? Is it fame? Is it learning? Is it helping others? It's all of those things. And it's a lot of other things in between. And what I found really useful when thinking about motivation is to understand the difference between different motivations. So people do their best work when they're motivated. I think I'm sure you've all read or heard of Dan Pink and his book Drive, where he talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose as those motivating factors. And the most important thing really is to figure out which of these motivations you're appealing to. So extrinsic motivation, for example. Extrinsic motivation, that's where we're motivated to do something or to exhibit a particular behavior because either we want to earn a reward or we want to avoid some sort of punishment. So you probably don't enjoy the behavior, you probably don't find it satisfying, but you either expect to get something in return or you expect to not suffer some sort of unpleasant activity or punishment as a result. Whereas intrinsic motivation is what we do when we are working and we find something rewarding. So the act of performing the activity is the reward. And so in the context of teams, we can think about people need their basic needs fulfilled. So they need money, enough money to live the lifestyle they want to live, have a roof over their head, put food on the table. But that's not enough. That's not what kind of really keeps you rewarded in work. Because when we're motivated intrinsically, we're happier, we're more focused, we're less likely to be distracted, and we're also more forgiving of our mistakes. And so we can kind of move forwards. So we need to be thinking about how we appeal to both of these and kind of harness both of these. So I thought we could play a little game, because games are fun. I thought we could play a little game of, you can tell me whether you think the following things I'm going to read out are extrinsic or extrinsic motivations. So do this by tomorrow or I'll fire you. Is that intrinsic or extrinsic? Yep, we started easy. Remember when you were a kid and you used to get told off for cleaning your room? I've got a 13-year-old daughter. I've given up with cleaning rooms. I can barely open the door anymore. So if your parents come and say, clean your room or you're grounded. That's an extrinsic one. Yeah, exactly. How about participating in a sport? Yep. Studying something you find really fascinating. You find yourself. Yep. How about if I come to you and I say, imagine you're a developer in this, by the way. If you go on this course and learn Python, there's likely to be a senior developer job coming up, and it's on a much higher salary than yours. Yep, mostly. Unless, exactly, if you're learning Python because you've got an interest in building new things, it's intrinsic. So it's important to think about how we can sometimes mold these together and not necessarily just keep one or the other. I'd like to think writing and giving this presentation probably appeals to partly the intrinsic part of me and partly the extrinsic bit. I certainly practiced because I want to kind of avoid punishment, if that makes sense. So it's really important to understand the differences between these two and figure out what you're actually trying to appeal to in a team member. And these are just some examples of how we are motivated intrinsically and extrinsically. So things like curiosity and cooperation and challenge are very kind of examples of intrinsic motivations and behaviors, as opposed to extrinsically things like getting the right grades, being paid enough money, buy one, get one free offers in supermarkets. That's very extrinsic. Now, one thing I would say with these and with motivations is if you want to explore these with your team, I've found nothing better than this. So this exercise is great. And so this is from the folks at Management 3, and it's called Moving Motivators. And what you have is you have a bunch of different cards, and you used to be able to buy these. I don't know whether you still can, but if not, you can download. I've downloaded them and laminated them. And it's a little game where each card represents a particular motivator. So, for example, status is a good example. And you work with your team member, you get them to arrange these left to right in the order in which they're important to them. And then particularly when you're discussing something like a change, you get them to move them up and down depending on whether that motivation is likely to be greater or more important or lesser and less important. And it can be a really good way of having a conversation about what somebody's motivations are, which is a really, really good way of getting incrementally helping them improve their performance. If you you can get under the hood of people really nicely with this. So that's the URL. It explains it in a lot more detail. I think you can get the cards from it. I would really, really recommend it. We use this a lot. It's great. Now, one place that we use this, and one thing that's really, really important if you're going to understand people's motivations, is to do it as early as possible. So whilst it's great, you could go back to your team and you could start to do these exercises, you think about, particularly if you're scaling and you're hiring, then how can you set those real clear expectations from the start and understand people's motivations from the start? Now, these are some things that we've found really, really useful. So over-indexing when we're hiring about talking about teams, for example, and talking about how we're set up and what our plans are, what a day in the life of an engineer, for example, at Bloom and Wild would be like, it really helps set expectations, and it really helps people to, like candidates, to decide whether their motivations align with ours. We do this as well through, for example, our job descriptions. So making sure they're extremely clear, they're in very plain language, they appeal to as wide a group of people as possible. So simple things like running job descriptions through gender decoders to check there isn't gender-biased language in them, not filling them full of bullet points. I mean, there's some really obvious stuff. There's a lot more that can be done, but it's really important to appeal to the sort of person you wish to join you. I like to ask people in interviews where they want to be after 3 months, which is our probation period, and then ask them where they want to be after a year, because it's a really interesting one to understand their motivations. Some people will come and they will say, oh, I want to be senior in a year. Interesting. Some people will say, I want to learn. Some people will say, I want to be recognized as the expert in X or Y or Z. But you can learn so much, and you can learn so much about how you can align, or whether that person's motivations do align with your culture and what you wish to see, just through simple questions like that. And then when people join, setting those clear expectations, we use a Trello board that everybody gets, that's got people to meet, things to do, information that they can digest offline, giving them buddies inside and outside of their team so they can understand what the teams look like outside. Even more important that now we're in a much more remote world. And just simple things like checking in on them a couple of times a day. All of these kind of help understand somebody and set those clear expectations. So that's how you can kind of, you can look at what you're appealing to, but how about answering questions about how people are growing? So it's really important that we contextualize our support for our team members, and we're able ultimately to answer this question for them. And these are 3 ways that we do it. So we do it through career paths, which give direction and focus. We do it through growth frameworks, and we do it through something called check-ins, which make it really easy for us to give and get feedback regularly and consistently. So let's go through these. So first step, if you want to improve someone's performance and you want to set clear expectations, is to draw them a map. And this is an example of a map. So really important. There's some key kind of things on here. It's really important to me to make sure that there's an individual contributor track which runs roughly as far as the people management track. So you're not misaligning people's desires to stay as really awesome individual contributors by trying to force them to be managers so that they can get the amount of money extrinsically they feel that they need. Really, really important. Also to have some roles, and you can't really see it very well on there because the colour's got a bit wonky, but it looks lovely on here, is that this role and this role are kind of hats rather than roles, and they're deliberately there so that people can kind of drop in and try out a different track that's in a low-risk way. So none of this is a one-way door, and that's really important because like moving, for example, from an individual contributor to a people manager is actually a really, really big step. And for some people, it unlocks things and it's really what they want to do and it really appeals to their motivations. For other people, they try it and they don't like it. And if this isn't a two-way street, the only other option they have is to leave. And you've lost someone who would be awesome, but they'd be awesome on an IC track, not a people management track. So making it really clear who does what it means to be an individual contributor, and what it means to be a people manager really helps people understand how they're growing. It really helps people to understand do my motivations and how the activities that I wish to carry out that intrinsically in particular motivate me, do they align with the team or the company that I'm in? Now, these are great, career paths are great, but if you've got no way of navigating a career path, not so great. So a map is lovely, but if you can't read a map, it's just kind of like a pretty picture. So that's where growth frameworks come in. So growth frameworks, to me, they're almost like the GPS that goes with the map. Or I've recently got OS Maps on my phone. It's changed my life because you can put yourself by GPS on an ordnance survey map. It's fantastic. But really, it's about this. So it's about making things really clear, making things really transparent to everybody, and therefore making things fair. And growth frameworks are really about this. They're really there to answer the question, how do I progress? So how, by what I do, where do I go, what's the direction, what's the structure around this? And it's really about setting clear expectations. There's a trap with growth frameworks, which is when people see them as a checklist. So I've done all these things on this growth framework, therefore I should be in this role. So there's a way of selling growth frameworks effectively, but it became really useful for career planning for people and really useful for aligning their objectives with their longer term goals, which means then they are more likely to be motivated to do them. So we use them all the time. So we use them in reviews, we use them in check-ins that I'm going to talk about in a minute. We use them in discussions around career, but they're really, really important. And ours look a little bit like this. So we have technical skills, which are the skills to do your job, what's expected of you, what level of responsibility you take, what impact you have. I guess the further along the career path you move, the greater impact your role has. And really important how you communicate and how you lead at all levels, in all roles. So not just anyone with like leader or head of or whatever. It's really important in all roles. So our growth frameworks look a little bit like this. There's obviously much more than you can see there. If you haven't got growth frameworks and you're thinking about growth frameworks, go here. Don't just go to like my talk or whatever. That website is awesome. It has everybody's growth, or a lot of growth frameworks from a lot of companies on it. So it's great because it means we don't all copy Rent the Runway, which is most growth frameworks from the past few years all have they can trace their parentage back to Rent the Runway. So yeah, I'd really recommend that site. It's really, really, really useful. There's another point here as well around kind of when you're navigating through using a growth framework, don't be afraid to talk about the opportunities that are coming as people either navigate that or as your team scales. I've fallen into the trap in the past, for example, of where I've been afraid as a manager to discuss with people that there might be this opportunity they might be good for in 6 months, so let's get you ready, because I've been worried about what would happen if that role didn't materialize or if I overset the expectations and they'd expect to be promoted in 6 months. Reality is, I don't think things like that are worth worrying about. I think it's much better to get people ready and then have an adult conversation about why they're not ready or why circumstances have changed and sorry, the thing we were getting you ready for is not there anymore. Because the reality is, your role as a manager is to get people ready for that next role. And worst case scenario, if that next role isn't actually in your team, hopefully it's in your company. If it's not in your company, worst case scenario, you've set somebody up for something good somewhere else. And knowing the cyclical nature of tech, they'll probably come back and work for you at some point in the future anyway. And they're much more likely to if you've actually showed you care about them. Okay, so there's one other thing that we do that really helps answer that how am I growing question. And that's called check-ins. So it's really important to have a structure that allows regular feedback. So the whole problem I have with reviews is that 6 months to 12 months gap in the middle. So we use a system we call check-ins. So remember this from before? So this is the massive gap, that big bit in the middle we all forget and get on with life. And all the smells that I mentioned before, all those things, we're not used to something, we're not interested in it, we get anxious about it, we get demotivated about it. And those long feedback loops. So thinking on this, I used to work for a major e-commerce retailer, and I saw all of this in my team, and it really annoyed me. So with my engineering manager at the time, we made a bit of a kind of under-the-radar change without telling HR, which is something which we now use at Bloom & Wild, and it works really, really well. We took a lot of inspiration from Atlassian when we did this, so I'm not going to pretend we made all this stuff up. But what we do is we have monthly aligned and themed sessions that take around about half an hour. So there's a bunch of different themes, but everybody in the team, so in the engineering team, in the same month gets asked the same questions in these themed sessions. These are backed up by shorter term personal goals. So as part of that process, we set people goals, but those goals might last a month, they might last 2 months, worst case scenario, they last 3, but they're also checked in on at least once per month. So we avoid the set some goals, ignored it for 12 months, got fake surprised that no one had done anything on it. We also use this as an opportunity to get our team members to tell us how they are and how they're thinking and where they are on things before the session. So the sessions are focused on discussion. There's a tool that effectively backs this up and an expectation that these questions are answered beforehand, both by the team member and the manager. And so that time can be used for discussion. Ultimately, what we're trying to do, we're not doing something massively radical. What we're trying to do is we're trying to build timely, small feedback loops, bite-sized chunks of performance feedback. And so we ask questions, ultimately. These are some examples of some questions that we ask. So we have one called removing barriers, and there's a question there about what barriers have you encountered in your work? So an example here of why doing this across all of our teams at the same time is powerful is a year or so ago, we were getting consistent feedback from this question that it takes half an hour to build the website or build the web app. So we're like, okay, there's probably an opportunity here to invest more in tooling that will speed something up, and it will speed it up for the good of everybody. So we didn't wait for like the idle complaining, grumbling and stuff. This came through this process. We have one called love and loathe, which is effectively, how can we get you to do like more, give you more opportunities you love doing and get rid of some of those things you don't like quite so much. We have one called long-term career, or career long-term, which is where we focus on people's career development. We might use the growth framework there, for example, to facilitate a discussion. And lastly, and importantly, we also give and receive feedback, which is also written to the manager and from the manager every month. So every team member gives feedback on the last month and feedback on how, like for example, they think I've done in the last month, and I give them feedback. And the great thing about this is this happens every month now. So what we do at the end of the 6 months or the 12 months, so we still have a 6 month mandated process for the whole company. We just take each month, we put it together, there we go. We've prepared for the review. And the review is really short because we've basically just split the review up into 6. So it's kind of like a record of achievement, effectively. There's also some advantages from this, of course. Like feedback is always better when it's timely. People can course correct if you can tell them what they need to do and set those expectations as early as possible, not once every 6 months. Slightly selfishly, as a manager, one-to-ones are always better when everyone prepares for them. This kind of forces it a little bit, but I think it's really important because it sets that consistency. And so we have a timeline that looks a little bit like this. So these are all the different themes, and they repeat. We also have one called Check-in, which is effectively, you can either pick your favorite from any of the other ones, or it has the same structure of manager and employee feedback, but the rest of the agenda is a little bit less fixed. These supplement one-to-ones, by the way. They're not the only touch points that a team member and a manager has. But we've learned some stuff through this. I mean, feedback is better when it's timely and it's bite-sized. Coaching team members is much easier when you have regular and specifically themed sessions. And particularly when you have regular short-term goals, you get better buy-in. You get that record of achievement when you encourage your team members to prepare for these. And as a manager, you prepare properly for them. And the other thing is, I'd say if you do something like this, don't get hung up by tools. We ran this for like 3 years on Google Sheets before. We just moved it into the tool called tool called Lattice, but we ran this on Google Sheets for 3 years. Worked absolutely fine. So that's the individual, but great performance doesn't come purely from the individual. So what about the team? Well, I think this is really important. So the relationships we have with our teammates and our peers at work are far more important than the relationships we have with our boss, with our CEO. It's those people you work with day to day that are going to help you improve your own performance and help you improve the team's performance. Ultimately, if the team grows, you grow. And it's really, really important to be focused on that. And there's some ways that we can focus on that. So ways I found useful to focus on this is answer the question, what's expected of the team through a charter? Make sure there's a regular feedback mechanism from the team, not just from the individual. We use something called health checks for that. And then make sure that when you're talking about learning, you can do that in a shared way. So who's got or used team charters in the past? Cool. So it's effectively a set of principles, a set of rules of the game, ultimately, for a team. And it can really help a team have a culture of safety and confidence, as well as being a really good team-building exercise. It can include practical things, like we turn up on time, as an example. We find 8 or so items on a team charter is good, because it's kind of short and snappy. It also means you can make it look nice and put it on the wall, which, when we used to be in offices, used to be kind of nice. What we can do in this virtual world is we can put it we can put it in a Trello card, we can put it next to the team's Trello board when they're having retros, for example. I found the single best way of forming these is to use a technique called reversal, because as humans, we're really not very good at thinking about brilliant things, but we're absolutely fantastic about thinking about what will go wrong and the worst things. And so we tend to run our charters using that technique. So think about all the things of the worst team you've ever worked in, or how could we make this the worst team in the world? And then take those things and reverse them. So no one turns up on time becomes everyone turns up on time. So team charters set clear expectations, really important. Having a feedback mechanism, super, super important. People will do their best when they can tell you what's blocking them. And so we use a health check mechanism that I call it inspired by Spotify. So if you want the exact way that it might have been done at some point in Spotify, then it is all on the internet. It can be quite good just for getting the PowerPoint so you can make your own cards. But ultimately, it's an exercise whereby you have a number of different cards with a number of different categories on them, and they have effectively two competing messages on them, one of which is quite positive and one of which is quite negative. And teams have a set of traffic light cards, or what we found works really well remotely is you get people to go and find a red thing, a green thing, and a yellow thing in their house, because it's fun. People find silly stuff. And you ask these questions, and then the team, everybody votes on which they feel closer to. So do they feel closer to the positive statement? Hold up the green card. Do they feel things are closer to the, less positive statement? Hold up the red card. Do they think they're somewhere in between? Hold up the yellow card. And it's really good to raise self-awareness and see where we can focus our coaching efforts. It's caveated with this always represents a snapshot in time. It does tend to be biased by what's happened the month before, but it's all about support and improvement. And we make sure it's really, really clear for that culture of safety that this isn't used to judge. We don't use this to compare teams to teams, for example. It's not some sort of maturity model or something you progress through. But what is really powerful when you've done this a few times is you can look at the deviation from previous health checks. So you can see whether, for that team, things are getting better or things are not, which is effectively what this bit here shows. So that's a deviation. That then gives us the opportunity to go to the team and say, well, okay, let's maybe talk about the two things that have got worse, because we can probably turn something around. What can you do about the two things that have got better? How can you do more of them, make things better? And maybe take one in the middle, because one of the ones in the middle where you all feel a bit about it is probably actually really, really worth focusing on. Now, we use these, we do them every 3 months. We use them in the engineering teams. We use them in our communities of practice. We use them in our senior tech leadership team as well. It's a really important feedback mechanism. It supplements the individual's feedback coming, for example, through the check-ins. So here's an example of one from a couple of health checks ago. Right down the middle, probably worth looking at that one. So we got our team to look at this one. This was where we got very excited about Lego Serious Play. I'd love to talk more about Lego Serious Play, but I've only got like 5 minutes left. But we got suffice to say, that is a team's representation of their perfect team, built collaboratively. I'm not going to attempt to explain this because I'm not in that team. I might take a guess at what the ladder's for, and then some actions out of it. So effectively, here's some things we can do, either as a team or outside of the team, that we can support and sponsor that will help turn that yellow into something maybe next time that's a little bit more green. And then the last point, which is around if you're in a team and you want to learn, you want to improve, you want to put and facilitate ways in which that can be done in a shared way. So we have something called Tech and Share, which is time that is available to our engineers to learn what they want, and we encourage them to do it in a collaborative way. We have things like book clubs, for example, pairing opportunities. We're not the organisation that enforces pairing. If people want to pair, that's great. If they don't want to pair, that's also great. It's not like you can't be a part of this team if you don't pair. We're not kind of pairing dictators. And then we encourage teaching of what people have learned. So things like Tech and Share, for example, can be used by engineers to teach other engineers. And we have, for example, a Trello board with shared learning opportunities. So if you want to learn something, you pop it on this board, and if lots of people want to learn it, we've probably got a shared learning opportunity, but we might also have somebody in the team who knows how to teach it. And so they get the experience of teaching, everybody else gets the experience of learning. Everybody does something they want to do, everybody incrementally improves their performance as a result. And we're scaling rapidly, and that means people are joining our teams all the time. And what's really, really important is these activities like, for example, doing the charters, moving motivators, any team bonding. If you add or remove somebody from a team, you should really seriously think about doing those again and resetting them, because you've fundamentally changed that team. Even if you've only added or removed one person, it's not the team that was there before. So I really like this quote. Heidi Helfand's written a book called Dynamic Reteaming, which is very good. I would very much recommend reading it. Okay, so that's the team, but then how can we all align together? So culture is, for me, the best way of aligning. It's those expectations. It's like a ramped up, souped up version of team charter. It kind of sets that shared expectation, that alignment across your entire company. And there's some things we do that I think really help that. So having shared company values, for example. So if you make your values really clear, and you make them really clear in your hiring process, people can make an informed choice about whether you're the sort of company whose values resonate with their own, and whether your mission, your purpose is something that they can get on board with. In that situation, they're far more likely to be intrinsically motivated and therefore perform better. We have, for example, a company goal to try to make sure that we don't degrade our culture as we scale. We make having a high employee net promoter score, so effectively a feedback mechanism and a feedback score, a company OKR. Because I think it's really important to make sure that as we get bigger, we do that in a scalable way. We don't do that in a culture destroying sort of way, which is a lot easier to do, but is not a very sensible thing to do. And it's frankly not nice. And being able to promote those values and promote the idea of happiness, I think is super, super important. We do that through values. We do that through what we call happiness boards as well. Now, these are our values. Your values will be different. And I'd say one thing, so make those values really visible, talk about them, figure out how you can embed them in your culture. If you don't have them, make them. Maybe some sort of reversal-based workshop like charters is a good way of getting to values. They really help people align, they help people to know what's expected of them, and also they help people to feel proud, which is a really important part of intrinsic motivation. So one way we do that is we use a little bit of technology that enables us to, or enables people to effectively call out people that have done something great to our values. So we have a little Slack bot called ValuesBot, and anyone can fire this up, and anyone at any time can give a little bit of feedback, which goes publicly on a public Slack channel, and is DM'd to the person to thank them for doing something which aligns to one or more of our values. So it's a really, really simple thing. At the end of the month, we have a monthly meeting. We take all of those values that have been submitted, and we pick what we think are the top 5. So effectively the top 1 per value, because we have 5 values. And then we have a little vote, and the winner ultimately wins some sort of nice prize. So it's just a really simple example of embedding values and making people feel good about it. People also get their name for the values. If you've raised a values, like Slack values recognition, either up on a board or on a Trello board, because we're not office-based anymore, but that's how, when we were in the office, that's how it used to work. It's kind of transitioned to online now. And this comes from the ideas that you can read through, say, Management 3, for example, and Managing for Happiness, is if you do things that make people happy, happy people do better work. We spend most of our time at work, so frankly, why not be happy? Why not be intrinsically motivated? Some teams have happiness boards as well, for example. So every time somebody does something that makes somebody in the team happy, they slap a post-it note on the board, or virtually they stick it on the board, and when they get to a certain number of post-it notes, they go out and do something fun. We give them a bit of money to go out for a meal, or, I don't know, buy a cake or something like that. So it's reinforcing the good and promoting happiness. Right, and finally, if you want to do a lot of this stuff, you'll probably find you run into an HR barrier. So companies do have consistent people and HR processes for a reason. Let's not forget this. It's sometimes quite hard to influence and change them. But I would say first try, because you might be surprised. Our people partners are actually really engaged in quite a lot of this stuff, and not a lot of people pay too much attention to it or really try and promote it. So when you come along and you say, I'm doing this and it's really exciting, they might really, really engage with it. If not, figure out how you can fly it under the radar. So the check-ins process I mentioned earlier, for example, didn't tell HR about that at all, but it didn't matter, because ultimately what came out at the end of it was good performance reviews and good feedback and motivated employees. And that's what our HR team in that company really cared about. So yeah, don't be afraid about flying it under the radar if you have to. So 5 questions, ultimately, I think that really help us incrementally improve performance. So what am I appealing to? How am I growing? If you can answer that question. How's my team growing? How can we align? And there's one more if you want to take a picture. And then how does our HR process support us? So all of these things, I think, really help incrementally improve performance. I'm waiting for the last camera to go down. There we go. So ultimately, with a little bit of love and attention, you can get the best out of almost anybody. And because let's not forget, everybody wants to do the best. Everybody comes to work to do the best. We need to build an environment that really helps people achieve that. And doing that is what really incrementally improves performance. So thank you very much. These are the books that I found really useful. I've blogged about a little bit of this, although not particularly recently, on my blog. We are hiring remote roles. It would be remiss of me not to say that. We are lovely. There's lots of flowers. Have cheap flowers if you like. Thank you.